Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Your Spiritual Journey. This is Dr. Bob, and this is the space and the place where we talk about things important to your soul. As always, we ask you to like us, support us on Patreon if you can, and leave comments wherever you'd like. All those things help keep us on the air. Today's guest is coming to us from Sydney, Australia. Her name is Dr. Heidi Heron, and she has a fascinating story to tell. And if you're on YouTube, you can see her book in front of me. She's a globally recognized psychologist, an NLP Master Trainer, and co-founder of NLP Worldwide. And we've talked about NLP on a couple episodes already, but we're going to hear it from the Master Trainer. She's penned a book that's a modern fable exploring authentic, values-driven living through psychology and spirituality. So if you see the book here, it's called The Wizard of Cause. And she masterfully weaves psychology, spirituality, and storytelling into a modern parable that delves into the essence of living a life guided by authentic values. It's an extremely value-laden book, and I found it very fascinating because it's not just a parable, but she provides us with many tools, and somebody might even call it a DIY therapy session. So I'm excited to hear from Dr. Heidi. If you will, let us know about your spiritual journey from childhood till now, and then we'll get into the book and some questions. So the mic's all yours.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And thank you for the wonderful introduction as well. I love this question, and I've listened to a number of your podcasts and how people have answered this question. And I agree with most of them when they say that spiritual journey is ever evolving and never ending. My own is no different than that. So I was brought up in a very spiritual family. Not necessarily religious, but a very spiritual family. My father practiced Buddhism, so I always saw him meditating in the corner on what I always thought until a certain age was the dog's bed. And he would just sit and regroup and reconnect with himself. And anytime he would get what sometimes we called the angry Buddha dad, he would retreat and take some time off on his own to just regenerate and reconnect. And there became a time when um, I would hear my mother say, "Do you need to go sit?" Which was his, you need to go take that time off on your own. My mother was very spiritual. She was also psychic from a very young age. And so, into our world, my brother and I, we were brought into an aspect that we learned that we were in control of ourselves a little bit more than what our friends possibly knew. If we did go to a church, which was probably maybe a dozen times through my childhood, it was a unity church. And there was a book that I had when I was little about breathing in the good and breathing out the bad. And a number of years ago, I bought a copy on eBay, and it was a brilliant little book that we have that inner power, that inner knowing that we can control more of what's going on inside of our minds, inside of our worlds than we think of. And that there is a bigger sense and a bigger source of oneness and wholeness, and everything and everyone are connected. Now, this is big stuff for little kids, but it wasn't drilled into us. It was just kind of scoped. We got in trouble, but we also had conversations of what were you hoping to get out of that behavior? And how could you have done that a little bit differently? So I think that as children, my brother and I were brought up to think more than just ourselves and to think about how our actions infiltrated and had a ripple effect into the world. And I think I can't even imagine what my childhood would have been like without that aspect.
Yeah.
Just brilliant. Um, I wasn't brought up with religion per se, so I was a little bit naive from a religion standpoint, and I never thought that was an issue until maybe a few years ago, when I wanted to know more. Um, but my mother had, like, she read the books, the Ramtha books, and there was, I don't know if you're familiar with Ramtha, or any of your listeners are, but it was probably mid 80s, and I just remember her saying this indeed, which was the channeled Ramtha statement. I didn't really know my family was different, but I do remember I was probably about 9 or 10, maybe a little bit younger than that, and a friend came over, and I think my mom was reading somebody's cards or something like that, and my friend started crying, and she said, I have to call my mom. And I lived in Colorado. I am in Australia now, but I grew up until about 13 in Colorado. And my friend said, I have to call my mom. I have to have her come home and bring me home. I have to go home. And I said, how come? She said, because your mom's a witch.
Oh,
And and this is
okay.
the first time that I ever knew she was a witch. First time I knew she had some sort of special powers or something, or did something that was out of the ordinary and that people might be a little bit scared of. And I didn't really understand why or what that was. And I remember afterwards, when my friend did go home, that my mom sat down and said, look, in this household, where we start from love and we connect with things that are bigger than us. And not everybody really understands that. And you can connect with something bigger than you, and you do every day. And I remember that concept. Um, but I think my first adult, and I would say young adult experience of coming into my own spirituality, um, well, actually, even before that, as a young kid, my dad had the book, Jonathan Livingston Seagull,
Oh, yeah.
and I loved that book. I really didn't understand it until I reread it as an adult, but I loved the book because there was, just as I would read it as a kid, um, not really understanding what the concept was. I was I do remember being enthralled with this option of, you don't have to be like everybody else, and that you can create your own freedom, and that what you choose is what you create, and it doesn't matter what anybody else says, but then you can be the conduit and help other people. Possibly I didn't get all of that as a kid, but um but I do remember going to that book very regularly as a kid. I think I was drawn to the cover, which is just this solo um seagull flying in the air. But I think as an adult, I remember going to a New Age fair in Colorado. It was after I went to school in Australia, moved back, and went to university in Colorado, and then moved back again to Australia. So this is another Colorado thing. And I think Colorado also is interesting because there's such an interesting spiritual mecca, if you will, in so many different ways through spirituality and neurolinguistic programming. It's an interesting hub of NLP there too. But I was probably about 20 or so, and I went to this fair, and I was supposed to be meeting family there, a cousin and aunt and my grandma. And I was there for 3 or 4 hours. They were too. I never saw them. Never saw them. But what it gave me an opportunity to do, and I was just in this realm of bringing in this energy. I got a reading from somebody. I stopped and I bought books. I looked at runes. I bought this beautiful bracelet. Interesting, my grandmother bought the same exact bracelet
Ah.
the same day. Um, and I bought two books. One was Betty Eady. I forget the name of it, but it has something to do with near death experiences or afterlife experiences or going into the light, something like that. And another one on creative visualization by is it Shakiti Gawain, I believe. And those are my first two purchases on my own, in my own space, exploring without And I think it's absolutely divine that I did not meet my family that day because I don't
Oh.
know that I would have had the same experience.
Mhm.
And I think those two books started to really open my eyes a little bit more into the possibilities of, um, what happens. In my family, we were always, taught about reincarnation and about karma and good karma and giving back and paying forward and lessons learned and all of that stuff. But I think in both of these books, it started to give me more insight where I was paying attention to what was happening in me instead of what my
Mhm.
parents were giving to me.
Yeah.
And I started to tune in a little bit differently from I think that point. That I think was my turning point personally. A
Mhm.
few years later, I picked up a book about NLP, neuro linguistic programming, and I had done my undergrad degree in psychology and communication and learned a lot of theory and learned a lot about people, but didn't learn a lot about how to help. And I found in that a whole new connection, and not just from a psychology connection, but I found a huge amount of spirituality connection in it because I believe that we're more than just this body and mind, but that body, mind, and spirit. And when we can live in alignment in that manner, in that way, everything becomes possible. And I found that the skills of NLP help us to get out of our own conscious thinking, analytical way. And more over the past 26 years now, I've been in training NLP and a little bit more with working with people one on one. That it's about coming back to wholeness. It's coming back to oneness. It's about allowing ourselves to reconnect into who we are at our core, at our essence, at our beingness. And I think my journey along spirituality has grown from that. I mentioned before that I wasn't brought up with religion and never thought that was an issue. But the more I learned about people and that religion was such a big part of so many people's beliefs. I was like, I need to know more. I want to know more. And so I started looking into different religions and I've studied a little bit. I can't say that I'm a master of any of them, but a little bit of so many different religions to understand what's going on. And something that I love is that invisible string that runs through them that so much from what I understand, regardless of what it is, what religion we're talking about, there's a string of love and a string of hope and a string of togetherness and community and power and presence. And not always oneness, but there's that higher power that we can all tap into. And there's that string. And not below the surface, I think it's not about fear and not about scarcity and not about anything other than let's come back to ourselves. I love that. I started to do some work with more new thought movements, Science Mind or Centers for Spiritual Living. I have a wonderful mentor that helps me in my spiritual journey. And a few years ago, it was during COVID actually that I completed a master's in consciousness. Prior to that, I had done my master's and then my clinical psychology, my doctorate in clinical psychology. But that master's in consciousness was so eye-opening because there was more information about quantum physics and consciousness and religions and what ties us together in that mind-body connection and quantum doctor and so many wonderful guides and mentors and teachers along the way that just keep moving into my life and just keep opening my awareness. And within all of that, my desire is to help people open their awareness. And that's where this beautiful book comes in. And I'm still growing, I'm still learning, I'm still moving forward. But I think that's pretty much my journey in a small nutshell
Yeah.
along my spiritual path.
Okay. Well, what a great upbringing. I mean,
Agreed.
just to start with the spiritual rather than the religious,
Mm-hmm.
and to understand, that we are more than these physical bodies, and that we're all part of the oneness. And that's,
Yeah.
it's taken so many of us so many years to arrive at that, and to start with that as a foundation is just
Oh,
amazing. What a
I'm
gift.
blessed for sure.
Yeah. So there's a few questions that I have. Uh, and what I'm curious about with your book is that it did start off, uh, you state, as a nonfiction exploration, and suddenly it flipped into this fictional account and parable. So how did that happen, and why do you think that happened?
Great question. I had been writing this book for years. One of my there's two aspects of NLP that I absolutely love. One of them is values. Values are what's important to us. Values are a guiding principle. If I can find out what's important to me about something, love, happiness, religion, career, money, time, energy, me. And these are big concept words like togetherness, growth, commitment, love, passion, longevity, whatever it is, big words. And when our values are being met in one given aspect, and we've got values about everything, then we're aligned and we can move forward easily with ease. If even one value, let's say in my relationship, if one value of communication isn't being met, there's something going to be not quite right. If more values are not being met, let's say I have 5 values and 3 of them are not being met, there's going to be a lot of incongruence. And I might not even want to go home. I might not want to see my partner. I might not feel right, but I might not know what's going on. And what I've learned through my clients, through myself and my students, is that it's such an important understanding of what is important to us because these are our guiding posts. And so I started to write a book about values. And then I started to go, well, it needs to be more than about values. I want to teach that aspect, that cause and effect, that where our thoughts go creates our life, and where our behaviors go create our thoughts, and what we put out is what we receive. And there's a direct correlation between cause and effect. And so many of my clients live in a space, and I think all of us do from time to time. I'm no exception, but we live in a space of effect. And I get angry because of, and I get tired and frustrated and sad or happy and joyful because of, instead of being at cause and taking responsibility and stepping into that. So I started writing that book in addition to the values. And then as I was learning and growing, I started writing about consciousness and quantum physics and spirituality. And it was all in this book. And I really got confused and put the book aside for a few years because then I was going, who am I writing for? What is this about? It's confusing. And so I had a goal this year to bring that manuscript out, which was hefty, and figure out what was in it. And I realized that there's two separate books. One is about cause and effect and values, and the next book will be around that consciousness and quantum physics and that side of things. So I put everything together from this book and about values and living at cause. And it was boring. It was really boring.
Okay.
It was very factual. It was very, like, I wove a couple of little examples in there. Um, but I distilled it back and I started to look at other like self-help type of books, and realized that they repeat the same thing over and over and over. And if you distill it down, my book would have been just about the same if you take out the core concept. It's a long pamphlet. It's
Yeah.
a long pamphlet. Who wants to read a long pamphlet? And so I went, oh, I don't want to write a long pamphlet. I want to write something that people will connect with, that people will enjoy. And I'm a Toastmaster as well. So I'm a distinguished Toastmaster, which simply just means that I can speak and have done a number of speeches and can do it fairly well. And I was at a Toastmasters meeting earlier this year, and someone was doing a book report, and they did a book report on the book Who Moved My Cheese. And I remember reading that years ago, and I went, oh man, I love that parable story, that story that tells a message. And then in my mind, I think I forgot to listen to the speech, and I just started listing off all of those types of books in my mind where the lessons in them were so powerful, but they weren't boring. And I went, and I took out my notebook and I wrote, gotta write a story. And so I did a visualization exercise later on that evening, and then just started meditating around this aspect of cause and effect and values. And out came, they need to be a wizard of cause. And did a little, can I do that with Wizard of Oz? Is it? And it was fine. And then birthed the characters and this lady's journey, who is a little bit lost in her life and she doesn't know what's important and she's stuck, and she goes on a journey to figure it out. And like you kindly said, it's more than just a story. But that's how it became a parable instead of a long boring pamphlet.
Yeah. That's, I don't know, it's like when the right moment comes and that inspiration hits, you know it, and you
You
can't
do.
go back once you've got it.
No, no. And once I got it, I was hooked. And once I got the character and what might happen, it just started pouring out of me.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that I had that fictional writing ability. Um, but I think because it's interwoven with a message,
Hmm.
it was so much easier because then the message comes out in my voice. Like even when I read it back, there's a guide in there, and that guide, she has my voice.
Yeah. And that's another thing, the structure of the book and the way that you uh, made decisions about the guide, about the compass, about the map, the tools. Uh, were those it in the original structure of what you were thinking of, or where did these
No,
come from?
no, they weren't. They weren't. And it would have been a little bit longer pamphlet and not quite as boring had they been there. Um, in that cause and effect aspect, when I started to the main character's name is Avery, and I first kind of wrote her story of where she had been and how she got stuck. And I it's not in the book, but I know what kind of job she has. I know what kind of thing she does because I got to know this character and made up this life for her, and then started
Uh-huh.
the story at a certain place. And I realized that as I was learning about her, that she wore all kinds of different masks, like we all do, based on the beliefs that we have, based on what people tell us. I'm the studious one, I'm the loner, I'm the freak out chick, I'm the control person, I'm the mother, I'm the caregiver. But those masks, those when somebody asks us who we are, those aren't actually our identities. Those are just the faces that we put forward. So there's a chapter in the book that specifically looks at the masks that we wear and allowing us to step into cause and choose, are those the masks I want to wear? There's another one that looks at titles, which I thought, oh, is this too close to masks? But it's not, because sometimes the titles are the work titles that we put onto us, or the behavioral titles that we put onto us. And again, it steps back and looks at, what do I want to choose? Are these titles serving me? And the beliefs behind them serving me? Um, and there's a compass that this lady is guided by magically somehow. Um, and no, that definitely wasn't in. And I thought, ooh, is it cheesy? A little bit. It's a little bit cheesy. Um, but I tried to do it without this compass, that, like, this lady takes this compass that she finds in her house and it points somewhere and she trusts it and she follows it. And it takes her somewhere. I think we have, and then metaphorically, I'm like, what is, this compass is coming into my visioning, and so I can't just ignore it. And so I'm
Mhm.
sitting there going, okay, what does this compass mean? And it was simply, we all have a compass. It's just usually not external. That compass is inside of us,
Mhm.
and it points to where we need to go. It is universe, it is God, it is us, it is pointing to where we need to go. But oftentimes we fight it. Where if we were patient and kind and loving to ourselves, we would listen, and maybe we would follow that compass. So yeah, it's a little bit cheesy because it's this external compass that shows up out of nowhere. But you and I both know, and all of your listeners know, that they have that compass. And when it
Yeah.
wants to point them somewhere, it will show up out of nowhere. And it's our job to follow it
Yeah.
and discern what fits for us. So I think every part of the metaphors that are within this metaphor have purpose, you know? Beautiful.
So your character is female, and uh, much of the masks and the titles uh, that she adopts are specific to women in to a certain extent.
Yeah,
But I found, as someone who's not female, uh, a lot of value in having read this book. Uh, and the exercises that you have at the end of the book, I found to be very valuable and helpful. So I guess what I want to say is, although this has uh, a female lead character, and that women will probably identify more with this book than men. Uh, as a non-female character, I still think that it's a valuable book to be read
wonderful.
by both genders.
I appreciate that. I really do. And yeah, I think it definitely leans towards women, because that's I think more women will connect. But I so appreciate that feedback. One of the first people that read it was a male, and he said about the same thing. He said, I still connected with where she was, because she's not somewhere that is unique to females. She's somewhere that's not unique to human.
Yeah,
And I appreciate that feedback. Thank you.
yeah. There's so much richness in the structure that you've chosen, uh, because each chapter has more than one. Uh, what would I say? I guess when writers are considering how to structure a book, they think, okay, should I do this in first person, second person, or third person? And what's the value of taking those different approaches? And what does that bring to the story? Well, you kind of blew that away by by taking more than one perspective on, whatever your message was for that particular chapter.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how did that come about, and why did you choose to do it that way?
Well, to answer that, I probably need to give a little bit of the structure of the book away um, to anyone who hasn't yet read it, and I think that's okay. Um, I wrote it very much in third person. Is that correct?
Uh,
The character is Avery. It's about her instead of an I, instead of a first person perspective. Because when something is too much of an I, and this is probably from a linguistic aspect from neurolinguistic programming, people take it in and they take her thing in too personally. Yet when a story is about someone, then we place ourselves in that character, but in a more dissociated way. And so instead of hearing, I have a problem with X, we hear that person has a problem with X. Oh, that's similar to my problem. That's Y. And so we displace that person, put ourselves in there in a different way. So that's the reason that I did not do a story from an I perspective and told the story about Avery and her journey. But the twist is there's this guide that helps Avery along the way, and she also finds a journal and she writes in the journal, but every now and then something appears in the journal for her to read. And in the book, it's a different font, it's a different text, it's a different voice.
Right.
And that voice is for the reader. And that is where the lesson of whatever Avery just came through, and that's specifically for the reader, for them to be thinking about how is this now relevant, pertinent, and applicable in my life? And I love that question because I purposefully did both without too much thought about why I was doing it. So it's fun to recollect and come back and go, why did I do that? But it's great. And um, the journal entries that are done from the guide are for you. And it even utilizes the word you a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, yeah, interesting. Thank you for that question.
Well, it's an interesting format. It takes a little adjusting to initially, and
Yep.
then the light bulb goes off, and you go, "Oh, this
Yeah.
is what she's doing with this." Okay.
Yeah. And I'm curious, when you were reading it, did your internal voice change between those
Oh,
parts?
sure, definitely. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
no doubt about it. And because you use a different font, and it's easy to see what's what and what the
Yep.
voice is at the time. Uh,
Yep.
and
And I
once you,
even had to figure out in the book how to do that. It's
yeah,
different. The chapter opens differently. It's a different font. It's a different look and a different feel. Regardless if it's the print version or the electronic version, it has that different feel in it. So the voice hopefully comes through.
so this came from you, not from an editor. That
It came from me.
Okay, because that was
Yeah.
something else I was curious about. Was it an editor
Yeah.
who said, "Okay, here's
No,
what we
the
should do with this"?
no, in fact, the first editor that I had it with um, said we should just keep the same font all the way through. And I said, no, I can't do that because it's not the same voice. It's not the same
Yeah,
energy. And it has to be different.
and I'm sure that editor had in mind the cost of publishing the book,
Yep.
and one font, and it's not an issue. We're going to keep changing fonts back and forth. That's going to cost more money. Yeah.
So be it.
Well, I had a male version of this book uh, from someone I had in the podcast over a year ago. and he didn't use the different fonts, and he didn't use that as a technique, but it was the same concept of a parable and
Yeah.
somebody, finding his way, who was sort of lost in his life and not sure who he was. And it was a journey
Yeah.
of discovery. So I found myself comparing your book to his book.
Oh, good.
That was from a male point of view, and the male
Absolutely.
struggles. So I'd like to just dig into your NLP work,
Please.
and then I'm going to come back to your book and ask you the question of how does the NLP work get woven into the book?
Yep.
So, in having spoken with a few people who are NLP practitioners, I found that there are some different definitions and applications in terms of neurolinguistic programming and the way different people view it and its application in typically a therapeutic situation. So could you talk a little bit about your framework for NLP,
Yep.
and what it's meant and why you even bothered
Yeah, absolutely.
getting so
Absolutely.
much
Let me,
in depth with it and what it's meant to you and to
yes.
your clients.
I would absolutely love to share that. I'm also part of the NLP Leadership Summit, which is there's about 180 of the elders of NLP. I'm still the youngest elder, and I'm happy to
Uh,
be the youngest elder. I'm sure that'll change at some point in time. But out of those 160, we've had lots of conversations, and none of us agree on one definition or one application of NLP, which I actually appreciate because it is so much and it is so big, but it's also unfortunate because then it gets confusing and it gets distilled and it gets denominalized. Um, but to me, I picked up, I mentioned earlier, I picked up a book about NLP probably in about 1996, 1997, and it had so much of simple terms of what I had learned in my undergrad degrees in psychology and communication, but with applicable tools. And learning from the communication aspect that if I say certain things, I'm influencing, my language is influencing other people's, the movies that they create in their mind. So I can be more influential with my language. I can identify patterns of limiting beliefs and ideas and concepts and behaviors just by listening to how somebody says something. And so from just a communication perspective, I learned that in early when I was learning NLP that I could just be more influential. I could ask better questions. I could understand people better. I could understand myself. I could understand more of why I got stuck in various aspects. And I'm like, there's more to this than meets the eye. I want to know more. My definition, my current definition of NLP is it's my toolbox, regardless if I'm using it in communication, in leadership, in coaching, in therapy, in whatever. It's my toolbox to understand how the language of our mind creates the patterns that we run in life. The programs of emotions, beliefs, behaviors, thoughts, identity, because we are governed by programs and patterns. How we wake up, how we go to sleep, how we fall in love, how we make a decision, they're all programs and patterns. And if I can understand how the language of the mind creates those patterns, I can enhance them with the NLP tools. I can change them if they're not working well. I can create new patterns of emotions, beliefs, and behaviors to help align somebody with where they're going and what they want. And to me, it was the missing ingredient from my psychology toolbox. I my undergrad in psychology, um, put me in the pathway of working in human resources. And that's where I worked for 10 years or so, is in human resources when I was first starting to learn NLP, because I didn't have any tools to help people. I didn't have questions to ask to uncover. I had more understanding about theories and things like that, but not to help. So I started working with clients in 2000. And then in 2010, I started my doctorate in clinical psychology. Uh, Truth be told, probably as a procrastination strategy to not have to get into a next relationship because I would be too busy doing a doctorate.
Yeah.
So it was a, a nice strategy for a few years. Um, I learned a lot more about psychology, but I still, even in a doctorate of clinical psychology, didn't learn how to help people. I learned how to diagnose problems. I learned how to help people create coping mechanisms, how to understand where patterns might have come from, with the ammunition that if I know enough, I can change it. Or if I know enough, I can do something different. But rarely do we do something different. We just know where a pattern comes from. And sometimes that's just more, I know why I'm so angry. It's because this happened when I was younger. And now it gives me, nope, see, I know why I'm angry. I remember one of the papers that I had to write in my doctoral course, one of the courses, we had to choose a fictitious character and choose three or four different psychological modalities and diagnose the client based on those different modalities and create a treatment plan. I think it was three and I did four because I added NLP in there. And I looked at like EMDR, CBT, rational emotive behavioral therapy. That was the first one, and something else. So I chose three. I chose the ugly duckling. We all know the story of the ugly duckling, the swan that's grown up in this duck family, and he's the ugly one. He's the odd man out. And every single those three modalities that I looked at diagnosed his problem, gave him a psychological disorder, and then created a treatment program to treat the problem, but not actually to help him see himself as a beautiful swan. It was to become okay with being the ugly duckling. It was to empower himself even though he's the ugly duckling. Not one of those modalities said, hey, duck, what do you want? Or non duck, what do you want? What is your desire? And in NLP, it's a very simple formula. It's where are you now? I'm an ugly duck. What do you want? I want to see myself as beautiful. What's interfering? Everybody's telling me and I'm an ugly duck. I have beliefs that are holding me back. I have values that are not aligned. I have behaviors of cowering and scurrying behind my father duck. What resources, attitudes, attributes, confidence, desire, motivation, what resources do you need and have? And then our NLP toolbox has skills, tools that I don't see in other modalities necessarily. I see them in some aspects, but not in the same function and form that I see in NLP. As you can tell, I'm a little bit passionate about this. It has tools that actually help us to not just identify, but change the interferences. That if there's a belief that I'm just an ugly duck, change the belief, not the words, the internal belief. Align an identity. There's so many tools that help us to clear those interferences and then build the resources that we need. And sometimes we need to build the resources before we do the change work. And sometimes we need to enhance something. And sometimes when we build the resources, that's enough to bust the beliefs and the thoughts and the concepts that help to get us to the desired state. Not just where are you, but what do you want? And then with NLP, we're building that bridge, at least how I teach it. We're building that bridge to get to that desired state, not in a fast, fixed way, but in a generative manner that keeps the change and that I think from a spiritual point of view takes away the layers that don't belong to us. There's a story that says that someone once asked Michelangelo, how did you know how to carve the statue of David? And Michelangelo apparently said, I didn't know how to carve the sculpture of David. I just knew I needed to take away the pieces that didn't belong to David. And I think that's what we're doing. That's what I'm doing with my clients and with myself. And what I'm teaching others when I'm teaching NLP is how to take away those pieces that don't belong to us. I think we're born whole and magnificent and beautiful. And then these layers start getting put upon us.
Yeah.
And we just have to take those layers off and become our whole, true, authentic self.
So that list of questions that you just talked about with NLP, they are in the book at the end of the book to help
They are.
us take ourselves through that process.
They are.
So I said I was going to ask you how you wove NLP into the book, but I just gave it away.
Yeah. But I think there's more, because in the book we're talking about beliefs,
Yeah.
and we're talking about there's a couple of aspects that Avery goes back into her history, and she sees these little movies of when somebody said something that stuck, because that's so much of where we get these little memories from, and these are patterns. I remember, it's a little off topic, but I'll make it a short story. I was working with a client who was trying to lose weight, and she had a cycle. She would lose it, gain it, lose it, gain it, lose it, gain it. And so we were doing some NLP work together, and we use an aspect of timeline that tracks and marks out your past, your present, and your future. And she went in this process back to this little memory when she was about 2, 3 years old. If it was a real memory, just a movie in the mind that her mind needed to give her at that moment, doesn't make any difference. But what she saw was this little girl that something's happening in her home and she wants to know what's going on. And so she's saying, what's going on? And what she hears is, you're too little, you can't handle it. When you're bigger, you can handle it. Now, our unconscious mind, that subconscious mind, takes everything personally and literally, and it's unable to judge. So there's a really good chance that if this was happening and her parents said, hey, you're too little, you can't handle what's going on. When you're bigger, you can handle what's going on. They probably meant you're too young. And when you're older, you can handle it. But there's a really good chance her unconscious mind took it as, you're too small in stature and size. And when you're bigger in stature and size, you can handle it. That was her pattern. When things were fine in life, she could lose weight. As soon as a little bit of stress came on, she needed to handle it. And guess what? She put on weight. So, with that NLP process and a couple of others, we were able to change that at the root cause, where the pattern began. Because usually it's something that in 2 or 3 seconds somebody says, and our unconscious mind takes it as truth, locks it in, and serves it to us over and over and over and over again
Yeah.
until we can recognize it and change it. So Avery goes back to a couple of those little memories of where things happen from, and realizes that, hey, that's not now. I can do
Mhm.
something different. And again, step back into cause.
Yeah. So I'm going to get away from the book for a minute
Okay.
because early on, as we uh, discussed and listened to your life story, you grew up in Colorado. You're now living in Sydney permanently, correct?
Yep, correct.
How and why did that happen?
um, it's probably a simple story. My parents divorced when I was around 12. My mother got transferred. She worked with United Airlines, and she was in the training department with United Airlines. And United bought the Pan Am South Pacific route in the mid 80s. And so I just remember one day, hey kids, we're moving. And she got transferred here to Sydney, Australia in 1985. And my brother and I came in 1986. And I was 13 and grew up here. And at least those teenage formative years. And it was different because I lived in, the country. My nearest neighbor was a mile away in the we had more trees than people. And I moved to Sydney, Australia, where there were more people than trees. And I went back to go to university and work for a few years. But this place has captured my heart because it's a very different energy. I don't know if have you been to Australia?
I have not. I've been to New Zealand a couple
Oh.
times, but not Australia.
Yeah, and it's also a beautiful energy. It's similar. It might just be this whole South Pacific region. But things are a little bit slower, a little bit easier. It's easier to share. There's a little bit more open-mindedness in some aspects. Granted, there's only 25 million people in the entire country that's the same physical size as the United States. And there's so much grounding in culture and native culture, and it's a beautiful energy space to be in. So yeah, I've been
Mhm.
back here full time since 1996.
Yeah.
And so I've lived more in Australia in my life than I have in America. I just still sound like this.
Okay. All right. I just wanted to satisfy my own curiosity on how all that came about.
How'd that happen?
Yeah. So as always, it's happened again that we are at the end of our time. Uh, and you said you've listened to quite a few of my podcasts, so you have an idea of what happens at the end. I'm going to ask you to leave the audience with a few words of wisdom. So this is your chance to do that.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. My word of wisdom is simply that we are more in control of our lives than we think we are. And we all are on a journey to become the best versions of us. If I had a idea of what the purpose of our lives is to be happy. And how do we find happiness? And we all have our own answers. And sometimes we need to find help outside to connect inside because all of our answers reside within us. And I hope if you do pick up the Wizard of Cause book that it helps you along your journey to find your wholeness and your happiness.
Okay. Audience, as always, take what resonates with you and incorporate it into your life. Put the rest on a shelf until you're ready to deal with it. And until next time, this has been your spiritual journey.